Your baby's mind is growing even before they arrive. The more you talk and sing and play, the more their mind will thrive. You gotta talk with your baby, play with your baby, read to your baby, make out you're a lion. Talk with your baby, play with your baby, read to your baby. Your words will grow their mind.
Hello and welcome to the Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast, a podcast where we bring early childhood experts and all the latest research direct to you. I'm Kate, I'm a mum of two, and I've been passionate about early childhood policy for the last 20 years.
And I'm Amelia. I'm mum to Grace, who's 5, and Ted, who's 1. And almost every year, number 1 on my Spotify Wrapped is white noise. So that's me, mum life.
Mum life indeed.
Kate, what are we talking about today?
Oh, today we have the big one. The one that is stressing out so many parents these days, causing so much guilt, so much confusion. I'm talking about screen time.
Seriously.
Yes. How much is okay? Is any okay? Is zero screen time even realistic? Not in my household.
Seriously, does it count if they walk into the lounge room and look at it? Or what about when they're sick?
That's right. And what's the harm of storytelling programs like Bluey? Are there educational apps that are okay when children are young? You know, we're both parents. We've all been there with our little ones. Screen time. It keeps parents up at night. There is a lot of stress. So we're going to try and get to the bottom of why is it so bad, what's okay, what's reasonable, and what are the best tips for managing going forward.
And I think we all know that everyone's doing their best, but the guilt is real, isn't it? So we've got someone who's going to help us today.
We certainly do. We have one of the world's foremost experts on screen time and on the impact of screen time on children's development. With us here in the studio today, we have Dr. Mary Brushe.
Now, Mary's research is published in the Journal of the American Medical Association on how screen time interferes with children's language development. It's called technoference. And we're going to dive into that later, but her work, it went global last year. We're talking BBC, CNN, the New York Times. You would have seen it. Mary has a PhD in public health and is currently a senior research officer at the Kids Research Institute Australia and an adjunct fellow in the School of Public Health at the University of Adelaide. Her work has informed state and national policies, including the National Early Language and Literacy Strategy and South Australia's Royal Commission into Early Childhood Education and Care.
So, Dr. Mary Brushe, welcome and thanks so much for being with us. You've done the New York Times, but now the ultimate for you.
The podcast!
The Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honestly so excited to be here.
Well, we hope you stay that way because we're going to get straight into it. And I want to start by asking you about your work. Amelia talked about global attention that you've been leading when it comes to research around this topic. So I guess, first of all, we want to hear about what it is that you've been working on and what you learned from it.
So my research really started by focusing on early language development, trying to unpack, the experiences that children and families are having here in Australia when it comes to their early language and what that looks like in terms of how much parents are talking to their kids, how many interactions they're having back and forth. And one of the things that, as we were exploring that, we heard from parents, we heard from early educators was, but what about screen time? How is that actually fitting into this puzzle here? And, this is something that we're really worried about. We don't know what to do about it. And so our research sort of evolved from there to try and, I guess, unpack what the relationship is between screen time and those early language. We know language is so fundamental in those early years to set kids up for success at school and later in life, but we don't know necessarily what's getting in the way of that. And so the study that you talked about, the one that was recently published, basically that was the exact focus of looking at how screen time from 12 to 36 months may or may not be reducing the number of words that parents speak, the number of vocalizations that children are saying themselves, and the most important thing, those back and forth interactions with the child.
Before we get to what you found from that, can we just go back to the basics of what is screen time? Are we talking about TVs? Are we talking about iPads? Are we talking about laptops? What counts and what doesn't count? And maybe just tell us, what's the big harm? What's the problem?
Because you were talking obviously just now about language development. Can you connect that with screens and what you were seeing? that screens were doing?
Yeah. So to your question on, what is screen time? I think that's a question that we get quite a bit and is often, I would say, a cause of a lot of confusion when it comes to parents actually trying to understand what this means and what it doesn't mean. I'll say in terms of our study, when we were listening to the electronic noise and trying to flag if it was screen time or not, we wanted to capture all different types of screen time. So if there was a TV on, that was screen time. If the child was using an iPad or a tablet, if there was a phone on around them, any of those sort of aspects of the screen time was counted as screen time. And I would say, generally speaking, when it comes to things like the current screen time recommendations, which I can touch on later, that is what people would consider screen time. So the only exception to that, and this is also stated in the guidelines, is when it comes to things like FaceTime or Skype or Zoom, that tends to be excluded from the recommendations because I think it's, well, yes, you often still need a tablet or a phone there in front of the child. It's giving that real-time feedback and, they're engaging. We don't want to say to families, turn off your FaceTime and put it away. Like, we want to encourage that with families. And that has quite a different implication, I guess, for children's development compared to them watching something static on a screen that's not necessarily engaging with them.
That's great. That's our first tip. So if you need to distract your toddlers, get grandma on Zoom, and that's okay. We've got a green light on that one. Mary, could you maybe tell us about the harms of the other sorts of screens where granny and grandpa aren't involved and it's just the child interacting with the screen on their own? What's the problem? Like, if we need to keep them entertained, if they're bored, if they need to wind down, what's the problem? And at what age is it a problem?
So I know this isn't necessarily what families want to hear, but it's a really hard question to answer. And I'll explain why a little bit and then, go into what, I see as kind of the current status of the evidence. Screen time research has been going on for quite a while now, but a lot of the research that we have was based previously when there was just a TV in the family living room. And that was the only option that families had when it came to screen time. And so, technology has evolved so quickly and we now have mobile devices and tablets and, even the way we use TVs are very different and there's maybe—
It's all on demand.
Yeah, it's all on demand as well.
There's no waiting anymore.
There's no just, cartoons in the afternoon when you get home from school.
Saturday Disney.
Yeah.
Not just on demand, on repeat.
Yes. Yeah. So, there's infinite choice now. There's infinite possibilities when it comes to screen time. So even just trying to, I guess, unpack the research where, okay, what can we apply from some of that older stuff, which is still valuable, but, what does that mean for families nowadays? I would also say that screen time is one of those things that can have, really multifaceted implications for lots of different types of development. And so, again, it kind of depends on what your focus is. So, my research focused on language development, but there's been a huge amount of work done around how screen time, can impact children's physical activity. And I would say that's probably one of the strongest pieces of evidence that we have, that more often than not, kids are sedentary when they're watching screens. And it means that they're probably experiencing less physical activity throughout the day, which we know is so important for a range of health outcomes as children grow up. Another thing that we're starting to hear more about, mainly with the new research around mobile devices, is the link between screen time and potential eye health problems later as well. We're hearing more from optometrists and ophthalmologists that that's a bit of a concern for them. Again, I think there still needs to be more research done to actually unpack like what that looks like and why. But as any parent will know, there's news articles every single week about the implication of screen time.
And I search for them all. So in your field, language development, what did you uncover?
The study was a very exciting study. We followed children and families from when they were 6 months until they started school.
How many did you have?
So we had about 450 in the study altogether, over the course of the whole period. And they were from South Australia, Western Australia and Queensland. So grateful for their time. We would visit them every 6 months and they were just really generous with wanting to contribute to research and science, which is so exciting. But one of the cool things in our study was that we used this new technology called Lena, which essentially is like a Fitbit But instead of counting the number of steps you take, this device could count the number of words that children heard and spoke throughout the day.
That's like terrifying to me.
Yeah, well,
And
that's
it's not-
frightening. I just felt frightened.
I was like, one, a Fitbit,
Yeah.
I feel shame. And now you're talking about a similar thing that is going to measure how many words I'm speaking to my children. That is like amazing that parents participated in that. How did you get them to participate? And I guess, what did you learn from it?
So, technology is just evolving at such a rapid pace. We're talking about screen time, but just, even the technology we have to use within research now. Look, there was definitely mixed responses. And with any research study, parents can make their own decisions about whether or not they want to participate. So, there was, of course, some parents that were, I'm not too sure about this. But we were lucky that there was a lot that were just really excited and found this new technology really, really cool. And they wanted to kind of find out for themselves how much they were talking to their child. Because I think, even myself, I have no idea how many words I say in a day to anyone, let alone how many are directed at my child. The way the Lena technology is set up is that it does record all the audio around the child while they're wearing it. But then it uses advanced speech recognition technology to automatically count the number of words and interactions that parents are having. So as researchers, we were very fortunate in that, we didn't have to actually listen to all that audio. The confidentiality was still there for parents, and it essentially just gave us the number of words after analysing the recording for us. So
and what kind of variance would you see, and what would you give that feedback to parents, and what were their reactions?
Yeah, so some of the earlier work that we published was really just around how much language are children hearing. And one of the, most surprising findings was just how much variation there was across families. So, for example, when children were 6 months, so that age where, they're not necessarily talking themselves yet, at least not in words, we were seeing a range anywhere from some families would speak 5,000 words to their child in a day, others were up to 40,000.
Wow.
And so, we see an average around between like 16, 18, but there was just such a huge variation there. And so that was another thing that we were thinking about. It's like, okay, well, like, why is that though? Like, we don't actually know at that point. And that variation really did continue as children grew up as well. The exact numbers changed, but we were still seeing families having quite diverse early language environments. And so the way we did the study is we did provide feedback to parents, but we did manage it in a way that we tried to avoid them using it as a bit of a tool to then beat their next language recording day, because, this is sort of something that hadn't been done in Australia before, and we wanted to actually get a baseline, not use it as an intervention. And that's definitely something that we, could look at down the track as a bit of a way to help parents encourage their language, use the Lena technology, see what their word count is, and then, try and up that the next week. But we sort of balanced that within this study just to try and get a sense of what's happening right now for Australian families.
So then with that study, where did the screens come in? Or was that something that naturally just rose to the front for you guys?
So again, the cool thing about this Lena technology was that not only could it tell us, the number of words and interactions, but it also was able to capture the amount of TV electronic noise that the child was exposed to throughout the day. So we could also get this number of, this child had 1 hour of electronic noise over the course of their whole day. And so we had this data every 6 months throughout the whole study. Now, when we first designed the study, that was never a focus, but kind of going through and talking to parents and talking to early educators and people in the community, they would sort of always be like, okay, but what about this TV time? What about this electronic noise? And so we really did realise that, okay, yeah, we need to explore this data and actually unpack it further.
So you're a doctor, but you're sort of like a detective here. Like you're finding out that there's huge variation in how much parents are talking to their children. You don't know why. Then you pick up on the screens in the background and then get to go and investigate whether that's a cause.
So in our study, what we saw was that increases in screen time were leading to decreases in the amount of words that parents were speaking to their children, the number of words that children were saying themselves, and that includes, vocalizations even before children aren't necessarily articulating words, and also decreases in the amount of back and forth interactions with the child. And so this was sort of the first study that had been able to capture that in, I guess, this modern era of technology. So our data was collected from the second half of 2017 all the way up through till 2021. So we had those mobile devices. We had lots of tablets in our study too. And, what I guess was kind of the most concerning finding was that for just every extra minute of screen time, we were seeing 7 less adult words spoken to the child, 5 less vocalizations that they were saying, and 1 less conversational turn. And those numbers might seem small, but then when the average 3-year-old in our study was actually being exposed to almost 3 hours of screen time every day, and you kind of extrapolate those numbers out, is actually, a lot of missed language opportunity there for families. I guess one of the things that we did really try and emphasize both within the paper and when we're talking to policymakers and families about those findings is that, okay, this is established that, there is, a potential issue within families in Australia in the way we're using screens right now. But, it doesn't mean that all children are doomed or parents are doing anything wrong. Like there's lots of ways that we can actually use screens now to encourage those language interactions instead.
Before we get onto that, and we will have a segment where we're going to give you some, really pull out from you because I really want to know how to use screens in the best way possible. For parents out there, because a lot of your research is on technoference and that's really what you hone in on. Why is it so important that young children have these conversations with their parents, as opposed to watching Bluey talk to them?
So technoference, we didn't coin that term. I'll just put that out there first of all. That's actually been around for a really long time, ever since, digital media existed and TVs existed. This idea that technology might be interfering with parent-child interactions. And that was around both language, but also the ability for parents to form attachment relationships with their child. And I think our study has just demonstrated that is definitely still a phenomena within Australian families, and particularly important when it comes to the early language. Now, what I think parents sometimes don't always realise is that early language can start, honestly, from when the baby's growing inside the mum, and should continue from birth onwards. So just because a child's not talking back doesn't mean that they're not getting the benefit of that early language. And so the screen time interfering, it's what we're talking about in terms of using it as a way to be interactive, because we just don't want to use screen time to displace some of those really vital moments that we're having with our child. And so, there's lots of tools out there like the Words Grow Minds campaign and all their resources to get parents talking more, and those back and forth interactions are just so valuable when it comes to that.
One of the things that we sometimes, I guess, are very conscious of is that we want to give parents advice. We want to make sure that they have all the latest research, but we don't want to add to the weight of guilt that parents feel. And I think screen time is one of the issues more than many others, that parents are just feeling guilt and
enormous guilt.
And I want to tune out. So when, you touched on recommendations earlier, the World Health Organization recommendation is 0 screen time for under 2s?
Under 2, yeah.
So when parents hear that, I'm worried that some of them will just tune out saying that is not realistic. Yeah. So one of the things we want to do is not encourage behaviours which are unhealthy, but make sure that parents know, A, what are the consequences of those behaviours, and B, what are the alternatives? So one of the conversations we are very, very keen to get into with you is there good screen time, better screen time, less bad screen time? Is there a way that you can have any tips on how we can do it in a way that isn't harming our children?
Yeah, and honestly, this is why I was so excited to come on this podcast, because I think often as researchers, we get stuck in the data and we get stuck in facts, and it can come across quite negative. And the last thing that we want to do is make parents feel guilty about, getting through every day with young kids, which we know is, it's really hard these days. And families have lots of different circumstances. So there's all different reasons that families are turning to screens these days, and we need to really understand that better. And I think exactly what you said, Kate, we've done some research talking to parents directly, and that perception that, the guidelines currently say 0 screen time under the age of 2, they don't want to listen to anything after that, because that just feels way too hard. And so what we've tried to do and create some resources, and when talking to parents about it, is thinking about, how can we reduce harms and promote healthier screen time behaviours, especially in that under 2 age group. Establishing these healthier behaviours as early as possible in life is then going to set you up for success as your children get older, and they are going to be using screens for lots of different reasons then. But having some boundaries in place or having those healthy habits early, gives kids the best start in life. So, one of the big things, especially when it comes to language development and using screens, is that we really want to try and encourage interactive co-viewing, which is this idea of, okay, the TV might be on or, the iPad might be out, but having an adult or even an older sibling there with your child and actually engaging with that content. Because one of the things we also know about young kids is that they can't easily translate what they're seeing on the screen into real life. So they really need that person there to kind of help facilitate that. That could be something as simple as, repeating words and phrases on the screen, or just pointing out different colours. You could take it a step further, and if we're thinking about, okay, how do we use screen time and still get our child's physical activity in for the day, have a little dance party to their favourite theme song or sing along to the theme song that they love from their favourite TV show. Things like that is actually building those interactions, and it's building that attachment relationship too with the parents. Having a little opportunity to bond with them is always a really great start.
I'm taking some things from what you've just said, and that I was right to expose my children to the 97 and 98 AFL Grand Final replays from a very early age, because I spoke to them about why it was so important that we kicked that particular goal or had that. Is that what you're saying? That whatever niche, you're watching, you can talk them through. And I'd like to say hopefully that encouraged physical activity later on as well. But I think that's what parents want, not just to say they can indoctrinate their children from a very early age, but tips on, if it's one of our interests that we could watch together, that we could explain. If Amelia's looking at me like, no, this is not what the doctor is saying at all.
Mine's a little different, but we also, I'm sure maybe you've heard of it. It's cosmic yoga or something. It's on YouTube.
Yes.
And we do that at home, and it's just a way of, being involved in what my daughter's watching, and then I can kind of still participate sometimes, but also drop out. A little different to the AFL Grand Final, but you still.
I'm feeling shamed again. Parent shaming is real. Yes.
What do you think Mary, in terms of setting boundaries? Is that being quite vocal with that? Is that being like, okay, enough TV today, or how do you really practically? How do you think parents should go about that?
So I think the first step is, one, having a conversation with the adults in the house. So, whether that's your partner or if grandparents are often looking after your children, and trying your best to get on the same page when it comes to what your screen time boundaries are, because, boundaries are difficult for kids, especially really young kids. You're going to have to constantly kind of reinforce that. And as they get older, they're going to push boundaries as well. But it is something that kids crave. And if there is kind of inconsistent messages going on when it comes to screen time, that's when it can also cause more confusion and, potentially a bit of, oh, but dad lets me do this. Oh, but mum has said no. So I think, first of all, getting on the same page is a really important step. And then it's also about following some of those boundaries yourselves. Again, when we're talking about really young kids, they learn from modeling what their parents or caregivers are doing. And so, again, I'm really not saying to put your phones away all the time and turn off all the TV, but your child's going to be more interested in your phone if they see you on it all the time, because they want to know what you're doing. Even if it's we're going to spend mealtime, dinner with a family, and we are all going to put our phones away, and we're going to use this as an opportunity to connect and encourage nutritious behavior in that way. That's a really great first step for families. It might be that that's your boundary that you're going to set, and we're going to start small, and it's just going to be meal times. So I guess parents, thinking about the way that they're using their screens, starting small as well. So, maybe there's a time during your day that you're finding, this is actually really, a challenge for us. Let's start with this and slowly kind of wind back some of the screen time and see what we can incorporate instead there. Another thing is, I guess, with boundaries, it's about communicating it in a way that your child will hopefully understand. And that's going to look different for different kids and kids of different ages. But, one of the things that we do suggest to parents is thinking about telling a really young child, you've got 10 more minutes left on your device. They don't actually understand what 10 more minutes means.
Time is so abstract.
It's so abstract. And so, potentially framing something as, okay, you can watch one more episode of Bluey, and then, we're going to wave goodbye to Bluey when the credits roll, and that's time for the screen to go off. And so, having that almost as like a bit of a ritual activity where the kids are, waving goodbye to their favorite characters, and then that's okay, we're going to do something else now. Other parents have talked about, potentially using things like timers and stuff so that the kid has an external stimulus to know. It's just kind of exploring different ways and working out what works best for you and your family. But those are some little tidbits and tricks that we do try and encourage parents when it comes to setting those boundaries.
All right, Mary, we're going to take a really quick break. And when we're back, we're going to get your number one piece of advice for parents.
Your baby's mind is growing even before they arrive. The more you talk and sing and play, the more their mind will thrive.
Every time you interact with your child, you're helping grow their mind. For more information, visit wordsgrowminds.org.au.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Dr. Mary Brushe, who is an expert on kids' screen time. Mary, just a question quickly that's come to me. When you go down a rabbit hole with social media and you're really looking at screen time and people's theories on it, there are some people out there who might claim that screen time has an impact on things like ADHD. What do you think about that?
So it's a really contentious topic, if I'm being honest, like within the research field as well as just amongst the community. And, I'll put on the record right now that I'm not an expert in neurodivergent children or at the impact of screen time, but just, from my reading and understanding of the literature that's out there, we see some really concerning headlines about how screen time is causing ADHD or causing autism. And I think when you actually delve into that a bit further, what those findings are usually saying is more about very high levels of screen time can be linked to things like lower attention span, which we know is a characteristic sometimes of ADHD, but it's not necessarily always meaning an ADHD diagnosis. And when it comes to neurodivergency as well, there's so many things that play into that. There's kids that the research is sort of saying that there's often interplay between their genetics and the environment. And so what we really don't know yet is how screen time might be, maybe there are some kids that are more susceptible to potentially developing neurodivergencies as they get older or their symptoms being shown. And screen time may play a part in that, but we really don't know. We don't know if it's causing any of these things or if what's happening is these children are, more predisposed to seeking out those high dopamine hits. And so, the screen time is quite attractive to that. And they were always going to be those kids that wanted to be on screens more often. And that's a very unique challenge for those families. Or, for kids with who develop autism, it might be, they're struggling with their social behavior and they actually, can make friends and have those peer relationships like through screen time and through computer games and things like that. And so it's a balance of trying to, I guess, we really just don't want to freak parents out. And I think the evidence is not there yet on neurodivergency. And if anything, we need to be supporting these parents in a way to use those screens to help support their child's ways of learning, because they're going to learn differently to other kids and they're going to experience life slightly differently to other kids. And that's not a bad thing. And if, screens can help them with that in life, I think that's great.
Okay, well, let's just put the question then. Is there such a thing as good screen time? And if so, what does good screen time look like?
So in my opinion, yes, I think there is good screen time. I think there's ways that we can definitely use screens to promote different types of development. Look, experts in the field may disagree with me, but I think the reality is screens are here to stay and we need to stop making parents feel guilty about turning the screen on and instead trying to educate them about different ways that we can make it healthier or better screen time. And, there's evidence out there that does say using educational TV programs or apps, can actually promote early language development. And so that's, choosing content that actually is designed in a way to suit the age of your child. So for young kids, that means often slower paced content, content where the characters are actually encouraging that interaction back and forth. They might say a word or a colour or a number, and then they're pausing and waiting for, your child to respond.
Miss Rachel does that.
Exactly. Yeah, Miss Rachel's a great one. And so it's about, I guess, parents choosing some of that content that, for example, you just need to have a shower for 15 minutes in your day and you need something to keep your children occupied. We hear that all the time, and that's totally fair enough. We need to prioritise parent hygiene and their mental health. So maybe choosing something like Miss Rachel or ABC Kids have lots of great options when it comes to that type of content that are really age appropriate. I will just say it is really hard for parents to sift through all the different types of content out there though, and there's new content happening all the time. So research really struggling to keep up, if I'm being honest. But there are some tools that parents can turn to sort of find out the educational value of this content. There's things like Children and Media Australia do reviews. There's also an organisation in the US called Common Sense Media, and they have lots of reviews about different TV and movies. And so using some tools like that can be really helpful for parents.
That's fantastic. Practical tips. If we could ban Baby Shark and anything Baby Shark
Cocomelon
related, Cocomelon. But so there's places parents can go, get reviews, check. And I assume the same is true of apps, because you can't keep track of apps, what's good, what's not good, what's educational. Is it helping my child's brain or harming it?
Something that your kids actually like as well. You can get something educational, but that doesn't mean they'll necessarily engage with it like something else. I think, though, we're leaving on a high here, and this is a good place to wrap up because we've got, there's hope in sight. You don't have to just throw out all the screens and on bin day. This is a question we ask everyone that comes on the Words Grow Minds podcast. Mary, with all that you know and all your research, what is the one thing you just wish parents of babies and toddlers would know?
Oh, one thing. It's hard to narrow it down. I think when it comes to screen time, it's never too early to start setting those boundaries and being role models for your kids. So it's the same when it comes to language. It's never too early to start talking to your baby. It's never too early to start reading or singing to them. And it's never too early to try and enforce those healthy habits. For some parents, that might mean we're going to delay screen time for as long as we think is possible. And to those parents, I say that's fantastic. For some, that's just not realistic. They might have older kids at home or, whatever's going on for them. And so trying to set those boundaries within the home early, picking that educational content and being interactive with it, I think is the best thing parents can do. I'll sneak in a couple of extra tips that, we try and encourage parents to try out. A big one is if no one's actually watching, the TV or the screen, just turn it off. It actually doesn't need to be on in the background. And I know some parents do talk about they just like having kind of that noise throughout the day, and I totally understand that. But try switching it out for something, like music or a podcast even, because young children especially really struggle to pay attention to two things at once. So if you've got the TV on in the background, even if you think the baby or child is not watching it, they're actually still seeing flashing colours and sounds, and they're not getting the benefit of whatever you're trying to do with them instead. That can be the same for meals, trying to put them to sleep. Minimising the amount of screen time, especially during those times, I think is really valuable for parents.
That is such wonderful practical advice, and it's been so wonderful for us to have you on the show. I think we have a lot to take out of that we're going to do a bit of a wrap-up over.
Dr. Mary Brushe, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
I could have talked to Mary for hours.
How amazing is she? That was a great conversation.
What were some of the things you loved that she touched on?
I really love that she's realistic. She's not adding to people's guilt. She's giving practical tips on how we can do things better. And I really love that she was pointing out that it's not that screens are necessarily evil, but it's that they're taking away from those interactions between a parent and a child, And we know that the number of interactions is incredibly important for that child's entire future. She was just being sensible as opposed to trying to scare people, guilt people, or lecture people. And I thought that was great. What did you think?
I like to think if people know and they have that awareness, it'll just increase, they can change their behaviour just a little bit with kids rather than, we're all just trying our best. And I think what you were saying, that's so right. Parents are just trying their best. It is hard enough, but knowing how to do it smarter, you can't get rid of screens. They're here to stay. Knowing how to use them in the best way possible in your house is good. And I really loved as well how she mentioned about boundaries as soon as you can, whether that's for you as a parent. And I catch myself out all the time. I'm looking at my phone and, my child's trying to talk to me and you're like, I don't need to be doing this now. And just really being firm with that and clear with all the adults in your life is a really good thing, because as she said, it's so much harder to wind back and get back on track once you've gone over what you would like to be doing. I think those practical tips as well that she put in place, you don't need to feel bad. Once you feel bad, you don't stop trying. But
I thought she had a really gentle way of reminding us that parents are setting the example as well.
It's very gentle.
And she had this gentle way, but we both kind of went, oh, yes, actually. Like, maybe we should pull out a book and do some role modelling that way a little bit more often.
Now, that brings us to the end of today's show. You might have been listening to some of the resources that Mary mentioned as well. Things like Common Sense Media and places to get some more information on how you can use screens properly. We will put all of that in our show notes as well. But for now.
And one last very big thank you to the fabulous Dr. Mary Brushe. And we hope you'll join us next time for more Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast. We love hearing from you. So please subscribe, review and comment on the podcast. And for plenty of ideas to support your child's development, go to wordsgrowminds.org.au and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
Your words will grow their mind.